Robots Radio. Games, lore, stories, community. Just press play. Welcome to the Fallout Lorecast, the podcast that explores the boundaries of our knowledge about the world of Fallout. Welcome back to the Fallout Lorecast. We are continuing this week with our look at all of the businesses across the Fallout games. And last week, well, not last week, but last time, we finished up with all the big names. There were a number of them. And alphabetically, what follows after big? Well, Bing in this case. And no, not the Bing that you are thinking of. There was not a search engine in the Fallout world, although that's an interesting question. Was there a search engine? Was there even an internet? We know that there are emails and computers could be linked together, but was there a greater massive infrastructure or not? I'll have to dig into that on a future episode. Anyway, we're talking about Bing to start this off. We're going to be covering some other very interesting ones, including Blamco and Blue Ridge Caravan Company. Both of those have a considerable amount of lore, and some others that are only mentioned a little bit, as usual. All right, let's get into it. One of my favorite memories about playing Fallout 76 was discovering the variety of melee weapons. And this was around the time that I had gotten back into playing some of the other Fallouts as well, because Fallout 76 launched right about when I was planning to do a podcast. And then, of course, I got into Fallout 76, started doing the show, delved back into the older games and realized that you could legitimately do a melee playthrough, which I hadn't done before. And one of my favorite melee options in Fallout 76 early on, because this isn't an end game build by any means, was the golf club. The golf club that you could come across at White Springs, you could pick it up, you could hit a bunch of ghouls over the head with your golf club. It just felt like sooner or later it was going to break, and yet it was so much fun to be running around hitting a bunch of ghouls with a golf club. Now, the company Bing that I mentioned before is one of those golf club companies, but it's not the only one. Also, it is not the default one. It is the upgrade to the golf clubs that you find, because you find a wooden-headed golf club, and I am by no means a golfer or much of an athlete really, but I know that in golf there are wooden clubs and then there are clubs with metal on the ends. Strangely enough, one of those types of clubs is a putter and the other is, well, actually a fully metal head. Both of these can be found and they are constructed by Bing, which is a company, as we know from the labels on the heads of the clubs, that was from Phoenix, Arizona, and yet you find these in Appalachia. The Rush is the name for the putter, and there's a 2-iron that is called the Sling. So the Sling and the Rush, and a company from Phoenix, Arizona. And outside of that, we don't really know much else, because the only information we have is what is actually printed on the club heads. All right, let's take it in a different direction from golfing. Let's talk about music. The BKM Recording Company is mentioned in the loading screens of Fallout New Vegas. It's subtle, and in the low-resolution version of these loading screens, which of course are the original versions unless they're remastered in some sort of mod that you've loaded in, the text is actually fairly hard to read. It's very compressed, it's very small on these images, and as you remember from Fallout New Vegas, there are images of different casino logos and musicians and the kinds of acts that they would have at these casinos. And two of those acts are Danny Parker and Paul Clooney. Now, who are Danny Parker and Paul Clooney? Well, they are jazz musicians who signed with Sinclair. Yes, that's right. Frederick Sinclair, the guy behind the Sierra Madre. He was a client of the Big MT. And seemingly, these two worked, or at least at some point worked with BKM Recording Company in order to produce their albums. Danny Parker and Paul Clooney and their orchestra ended up performing at the Sierra Madre Casino and Resort. So there's connections between all of these things, which is really cool. As for BKM themselves, we don't really know much about them other than they seem to be the music label that was working with these two musicians. Danny Parker and his Modern Jazz Group is the full name of the group. And on the poster at the very top, you can see returning by popular demand, Casino Ballroom, and then in very, very, very small text, BKM Recording Company presents. And it's almost missable. It's in the background. And then below that, Danny Parker and his Modern Jazz Group on an image that looks like it's the top of a piano. You can see Danny Parker's face at the top left. You can see Paul Clooney, because it says featuring Paul Clooney on the bottom right, and his orchestra. So it seems like these were two different acts that potentially could have been set up in a way where Danny Parker's orchestra was the headliner, Paul Clooney's orchestra was the less famous warm-up act. Or there's the potential that they were part of their own bigger performance. Maybe they had their own performances, but sometimes the two groups would get together and perform a kind of a duo sort of thing. We don't really know. All we have is this poster on the wall and a very, very minor reference to the recording company behind them. All right. Are you ready for a really, really tiny one? This one is a company called Blades who makes, you guessed it, razor blades. This is from Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. You can find the billboards in the games near the Boneyard and the town of Klamath, and there's really not much else we know about this. In fact, the graphics on those games are so old and so low resolution that the image on the billboards, you can barely see the word try blades, razors. There's a razor blade and a guy shaving his face, and then the text below that is unreadable. It just looks like a bunch of blocks because it's so blocky and low res. So there you go. There was a company called Blades. That's all we know about that one. Now, there are some companies that you see all over the place. If you're someone who got into the series at Fallout 3 or New Vegas or 4 or 76 or even the TV series, there are some brands that span all of those and show up very regularly. And because the nature of Fallout is that you're going to be scavenging the wasteland in order to find whatever you can use, and a lot of that is food that you need in order to help take care of yourself and survive, you come across companies like Blamco a lot. Because there's a lot of mac and cheese boxes still in the world somehow 200 years later. But Blamco is known for its mac and cheese and its instant noodles, and that's basically it. You would think we would know more about a company that we see so often, but outside of those two products showing up in the games, there's very little other information about Blamco. In fact, there's so little information that the only tiny bit of information we have about any of their employees is not their CEO. It's not some important wealthy person who funded the company. It is a delivery driver. How do we know this? Well, there's a terminal in Fallout 4 that talks about scheduled deliveries. And in that terminal, it lists next scheduled delivery, Blamco Foodstuffs. That's the full title of Blamco. October 23rd, 3:30 p.m., delivery driver Thomas Malkinson. That's it. Now, who is Thomas Malkinson? We have no idea. This is the only reference to him in any of the games at all. And if you notice on the, on the dates of the delivery, that was the date that the bombs dropped at 3:30 in the afternoon. My guess is this delivery never actually made it where it was going. And I wonder, and I'm not sure about this, but I have to wonder if you can find a broken down truck somewhere in the map with maybe Thomas's skeleton and some Blamco in the back, or maybe the Blamco's already gone. If you've come across anything like that, let me know. That would be really interesting to put those pieces of the puzzle together. So outside of that, we don't really know much else about Blamco Foodstuffs, although they do show up in the TV show. In the episode of The Ghoul, on the ground, you can see an instant noodles box from Blamco. And the label Blamco is actually very hard to read, but it's there at the top. Speaking of labels, some of their labels in the games are very interesting if you think about it. Blamco mac and cheese, at least in Fallout 3, just looked like the big logo Blamco with mac and cheese at the bottom and a bowl of mac and cheese on a green box. But by the time you get to Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, the Blamco logo is different. It's kind of got this wavy text on a blue background, and it's more of a cartoon mac and cheese drawn at the bottom, but with a bomb in it, which seems to imply that Blamco had something to do with explosions, like kablam, something blowing up. But that's about all we know right now. So there you go. Blamco. Because Fallout 76 takes place so close to the Great War, we end up with a lot of stories from it about people who existed before the Great War and then continued to live on after. The dates are roughly 25 years after the Great War, and of course, Fallout 76 has this kind of thing going on where updates come out, and supposedly the timeline has continued since then. There's kind of a funny thing because some things change and some things don't, video games, but we're getting the impression that these people lived before the bombs dropped, have experiences of that, and then had to change their lives in order to actually make things work in a world where everything had fallen apart. Now, people went through this, but companies went through this as well, like the Blue Ridge Caravan Company, which was run by Joanne Mayfield and her family for 3 generations. They were shipping across Appalachia on roads like the Blue Ridge Parkway, delivering products from manufacturers to distribution centers to the end retail locations. But of course, once the world falls apart, that doesn't really exist anymore. Not only that, but the roads start to fall apart as well. You can't maintain 18-wheel trucks on dirt roads without any fuel. So the company shifted. They decided that they were going to make things work with Brahmin, but there was another problem. The Scorched Plague was ravaging Appalachia at the time, and they, along with so many other people, had to get out or had to die. But once the cure for the Scorched Plague was found, they and so many others made their way back to Appalachia, and she reestablished her routes, her trade routes. So the Blue Ridge Caravan Company went from being a pre-war business to a post-wasteland faction, really. And we know this because they exist in the game. In fact, they exist at many different locations in the game. Places like Big Bend Tunnel, where they've dealt with the Blood Eagle Raider group, and we've helped out with some of that stuff in the game as well. In fact, because their trade routes are so expansive, they've dealt with groups like the Cult of the Mothmen blocking the Silver Bridge. They've made connections to other groups like the New Responders in order to help move supplies to places where they're needed. There's a lot of detail here. This is a story worth its own episode. So we're going to keep it a little bit shorter in this episode. But one last thing, you might recognize them from a number of events and quests throughout Fallout 76. And they've continued to be a major faction as the expansions have gone on. Steel Rain brought the quest Out of the Blue. Once in a Blue Moon brought Costa Business. And then Milepost Zero brought A Bump in the Road. And there are events across the map like Wastelanders Riding Shotgun or Once in a Blue Moon's Beasts of Burden and Safe and Sound. And then there's also Milepost Zero with its caravan quest Skyline Drive, where you actually escort a Brahmin across the map. There's a lot of stuff going on with the Blue Ridge Caravan Company. So if you haven't been paying attention to them in Fallout 76, it's probably worth some of your time. There's a lot going on there. And the fact that they're considered a faction makes them one of the most unique factions across all of the games. Plus, they are a caravan company, which is very similar to a company that uses couriers like the Mojave Express from New Vegas. So there are some similarities there as well. It's worth checking out.
Communists detected on American soil. Lethal force engaged.
So we do know of another Blue Ridge company in the games. Fallout 76 again, of course, makes sense. Blue Ridge Parkway, Fallout 76, Appalachia. The Blue Ridge Gallery is an art gallery and store that's a part of the White Springs. Now, it isn't one of those locations that's down underneath the big building. It's one of the locations that's out on the sides. You can go across multiple, I guess they're called little stores, because this is a gallery, but it's also a shop. It's a place where you can look at the paintings, but then you can also buy them. And it's still there. If you're walking down the area with all the shops, you can come across the bright blue door at the front of this specific shop, and the Blue Ridge Gallery sign above the door is actually in very good condition compared to the door and the walls and the objects around it. And when you go inside, you'll notice that there are still paintings up on the walls, mostly landscapes, a farmhouse, a lake, a sunset looking off into the ocean, some flowers and some water lilies, and what looks like a revolutionary character still hang on the walls. But what also is interesting about this is that there are no price tags. None of these seem to have prices or labels still on them. Also, the gallery isn't very big. It's a fairly small store, and it makes you wonder about the nature of the world of, well, the pre-bombed out, pre-war world, where paintings in a gallery could still fund a shop like this. They must not have had robots or AI making these images, or they wouldn't be valuable enough for people to buy at a store like this, which leads me to a secondary point here. People have been talking lately about how the Wasteland or Fallout future seems more and more likely as time goes by. And of course, world politics and all of that continue to heat up. And we also had advancements in technology and those kinds of things. Obviously, there's some form of AI that's driving the intelligence of many of the robots across the Fallout world. But yet, in this world, AI doesn't seem to have taken over the artistry. We still have musical acts, like mentioned before, that have their entire orchestras. We still have art galleries where people go to look at human-made paintings and to even buy them. The one little detail here I wish we had was how much were those paintings selling for? Were they still making a good amount of money off of them? And I would assume so, because a shop like that has to pay for its rent, and it's not a very large shop. So unless they were selling lots of other poster versions of these paintings in little bins that no longer exist there anymore, they were probably only selling a painting or two a week at a fairly large price in order to cover, well, their rent and their employees, their overhead. So there are some things we can speculate about this, but this seems to be the only location we're aware of, and it's a quaint little shop, so maybe go check it out. It's time for that spring reset. I'm taking a look at everything in my closet and figuring out that, oh no, this absolutely needs to go. And it's about time I replace things so that my clothes aren't older than my 15-year-old. Now you might think that they lasted that long because they were well made, but no, they're in terrible condition. Unlike the new jeans I just got from Quince. Jeans have always been my personal go-to because you can kind of wear them for lots of different things, but maybe they're not your thing. Maybe you're looking for, 100% European linen with insanely soft flow knit activewear fabric. It's definitely getting warmer, and their flow knit activewear is moisture wicking, anti-odor, and soft enough that you'll actually want to wear it every day. So pick out what you want. You can't go wrong because they have prices 50 to 60% less than similar brands. And like I said before, they are high quality. I continue to wear their clothes all the time, and I know that these new jeans are going to last me a lot better than the other things in my wardrobe. And on top of it, they look great. They're so comfortable, and I spent just as much on the jeans that I am now cleaning out of my wardrobe. So if you're looking for something better, just all around better, go check out Quince. So go do it right now. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/falloutlore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. Go to quince.com/falloutlore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/falloutlore. There are posters across Fallout 4 that you can find in varying conditions of quality that all say something like, Boston Communications, the sky's the limit. Boscom, phone and television services. Now, these posters can be found in places like the Theater District, the Pinnacle Theater, which happens to be owned by Boscom, because if you go to the theater and you look at the big sign out front, at the very top, you can see Boss space M. The two letters have fallen off, but originally that was Boscom Pinnacle Theater, and some of the letters of Pinnacle Theater have fallen off. And then below that, where the marquee would be, where you put in the little letters that kind of stick up on the sign to say, like, that's who's coming this week or whatever, it also says Spirits Privacy and Combat Zone that way with an arrow to the right. So this is a fairly known organization, although we don't know that much about them. How do we know that they're fairly well known? Well, not only do they own the theater, but they also show up in an image or advertisement that shows 4 of the predominant companies in Boston. Now, not all of these companies are actually headquartered in Boston. They're just very well-known companies like Nuka-Cola, Red Rocket, Fallon's, and Boscom. Outside of that, everything else is speculation, but we can piece together some things. They were a telecommunication service of some sort, and on the signs it specifically lists phone and television services, so phones and TVs were still in use, but these phones and televisions were connected to the information not through wires in the ground, but through satellites. Because on the actual posters themselves, we see a Sputnik-style satellite in the sky with these radiating bands that start at a very dark red, kind of a bright red, and then go out to more of a white color. And then below that satellite are 2 satellite dishes who are aimed up at it. Other posters don't include the Sputnik-looking satellite at the top, but include multiple satellite dishes all aiming up at the sky. And of course, that's what satellite dishes do. And of course, satellite dishes all look fairly similar to each other, but these remind me of the Satcom array in Fallout 3, or the satellite dish at the top of Black Mountain in Fallout New Vegas. There's a number of satellites you see throughout all of these games, and of course, they all look kind of similar. But none of those were specifically for phone and television services, as far as I know. So that's interesting. The people of Boston were getting at least some of their phone and TV services through satellite, not through actual wires in the ground. This also implies that some of those satellites might still be floating around up there in space. You have to wonder what they're doing. If you've played Fallout 4, you've definitely come across the Boston Bugle newspapers kind of scattered around the world. There's also the Boston Bugle main offices located in Boston because this was a Boston-specific newspaper. And because those newspapers still exist in the world, we actually know a little bit about this company and the people who worked there. First of all, let's look at some of the advertising. There are signs that show up in different locations. There's one on a brick wall that is very, very worn down, but you can still tell that it says the Boston Bugle and it has their kind of blue and white logo. And then underneath that, in very broken letters, because everything's chipping off the wall, you can see trumpeting truth for over 50 years. So at the time of this advertising campaign and this mural being put up on the wall, this company had been around for at least 50 years before the bombs dropped, which is interesting because newspaper companies generally you would think to be very, very old. But the bombs drop in the 2070s, and so this company would have been formed probably in the 2020s or 2010s maybe if these posters had been up for 10 years. But that's highly unlikely. We get other ads that show up in other locations with the same messaging. Trumpeting truth for over 50 years. So it says over 50 years. So I guess we could speculate on how long this company has actually been around. Those other posters are interesting as well. There's one that shows what appears to be a subway car with individuals standing on the subway holding the little handles that kind of dangle down off of the bars of the subway because people, of course, stand on subway cars. And they're all looking at newspapers. There's also another one in a domestic setting with a man drinking a cup of coffee, looking at a newspaper while presumably his wife is in an apron behind him in the kitchen. And the actual newspaper, you can read some of the text on this one. It not only says the Boston Bugle at the top, has the same logo that you find everywhere else of somebody with a trumpet with what appears to be a lasso or some sort of rope cords around the figure. But on the newspaper cover itself, there's, well, trumpeting truth for over 50 years and kind of an overlay that's covering part of the newspaper. But what appear to be rockets, images of rockets, and some text that says something like something line holds strong as the main headline. And then a side headline says Nuka-Cola Quantum worth all the hubbub ? And the smaller text is unreadable because it's so small. And it's actually very hard to see the dates or any of the text on the other ones. Although, as I zoom in, I can tell at the top left, it says Boston versus Washington in World Series Showdown. That's a reference to the baseball team. And there's on the top right, it says what appears to be, and it's smudged, but it looks like Real Horrors at Dorcas, something house. Now, pretty much everything else we know about this company comes from the actual newspapers themselves. There are 5 different articles, and they're each complete with a headline, actual text, a author, the person who wrote it. And here, let's just dive into those. These are kind of fun. Article 1, Case Closed on Crime Boss Eddie Winter by Mags Vecchio, Boston Bugle staff writer. In a move that has shocked and angered the people of Massachusetts, the Boston Police Department announced last night that they have ceased all investigations into the actions of reputed organized crime boss Edward Eddie Winter. Speaking on behalf of the special task force that had been assembled specifically to build a case against Winter, Captain Jonathan Widmark of the BPD said, after reviewing the evidence with our colleagues at the Bureau of Alcohol, Drugs, Tobacco, Firearms, and Lasers, it became clear that we were, in fact, wrong. Eddie Winter has indeed had a colorful history, but it is not a criminal history. By pursuing our case against Mr. Winter, we would simply continue to waste taxpayer dollars and, even worse, condemn an innocent man. It was an unexpected turn of events, to be sure. According to the Boston Bugle's confidential sources within the Boston Police Department, the innocent man was anything but. As uncovered by Captain Widmark's official investigation, codenamed Operation Winter's End, Eddie Winter was involved in every crime imaginable, from petty larceny to first-degree murder. And although nothing was proved, everyone on Widmark's task force suspected Winter in the August homicide death of their lead detective's fiancée, a Miss Jennifer Lands. Whatever the truth, it would appear the city of Boston has nothing more to fear from Eddie Winter. When approached for comment, the alleged crime boss could not be reached. In fact, his South Boston sub shop has been shuttered and his Harborside residence completely cleaned out. Eddie Winter, it would seem, has disappeared. Now, you might recognize Eddie Winter because he's ghoulified. You can come across him in the game. He has a history with Nick Valentine, or at least Nick Valentine's original human person, where his memories come from, all of that stuff. There's a lot of detail there, but this is a fun example of the kinds of reporting you get from the Boston Bugle. And there are more of these. There's actually 5 different articles and they deal with different things. The second one, I'm not going to read all of them, but we could probably go into this in a future episode. The second one's called China Showdown, the Atomic Ultimatum by Mags Vecchio again. Vecchio, maybe? And then the third one is Boston Food Riots Continue by Buster Connolly, another staff writer. White House Remains Empty. Where is Our President? By Mags Vecchio. And then Boston Headed for First World Series Win Since 1918 by Buster Connolly. So these are a treasure trove of little lore snippets. The one about China talks about soldiers being in Anchorage and the continuing conflict with the Chinese. The Boston riots talks about people rioting for food. The Roxbury Food Bank is broken open by some rioters, and then the 184th Infantry Regiment opens fire on them. So you have stories about unrest happening across the country. The White House remaining empty is interesting. Where is our president? At first, the assumption was that the entirety of the United States government had moved operations to Raven Rock. This whole thing with the president disappearing, it mentions the Poseidon oil rig just off of San Francisco. And then the final one talks about the World Series. And I detailed how the World Series was happening in Boston that year. And then they were getting ready for the game and the bombs dropped and some of the players survived. And well, at least for a time they survived. And the whole story behind that. So go listen to the Diamond City one. Oh, and by the way, that one, there's a video up now on the YouTube channel if you want to see an image version of that episode, an image version, a video version, a version with pictures, moving pictures, as my mother would say, who is not, in fact, like 100 years old, but for some reason still says moving pictures sometimes when talking about movies. Anyway, there you go. The Boston Bugle. And we're getting closer to the end of the Bs, but there are a lot of Bs left, like Boston District, Boston MTA, a number of Bostons. And then it goes all the way to Bysshe Company, B-Y-S-S-H-E Company, before we get to the Cs. But we're going to continue that in a future episode. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Let's take a quick break. We're going to go thank our patrons. We'll be right back.
Hello there, old chap. Good to see another of General Atomic's finest, still eager to serve.
All right. Thank you for your support to all of my patrons. We don't have any new ones who signed up in the last week, but you're welcome to come join us. Patreon.com/Fallout Lorecast for ad-free episodes, for t-shirts, for joining us on our patron chats, all of that stuff. And you can get shout out every week like Sentry Bots, Dusty Ray, and Germinator. Thank you for your continued support. And to all 101 of our paying patrons and to many other free patrons, thank you for your support as well. You can sign up for free just to make sure that you are plugged into any notifications or giveaways or other things that we might be doing in the future. So check it out for those reasons. And if you want to help out in other ways, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, just like No Shot 69 and Scridgy. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. No Shot says, almost makes you wish for a nuclear winter. Tom, or Robots, is a fantastic host who manages to mesh some goofiness with lore and introspective topics that make diving into this universe 10 times better. From BuddyBot stealing brains to having an impact on the real world with Fallout for Hope, this podcast gives you the best of everything, and Tom is a fantastic storyteller. I've listened to the entirety of the Lorecast in only 3 months and don't regret one bit. Much love. Wow, thank you so much, No Shot. That's very, very nice. And then we have Scridgy, who writes, beware! A toaster is just a death ray with a smaller power supply. Very nice. Thank you to all of you for your support and continued support. And we're going to keep the show going because all of you are still here supporting it. And I know things are getting a little crazy with some world stuff and stock markets tanking, and We've been through some of that stuff before. This podcast has been around since the last recession happened, and because of your continued support, we're just going to keep on going. So there's plenty more to talk about. There is a ton of lore, as we are finding, going through all of these businesses. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and until next time, well, don't do anything that will get you reported on by the Boston Bugle, because it all seems to be terrible news. Well, maybe except for the baseball game was going to be good news, and then it didn't happen. So stay safe in the wasteland. I'll see you next time. To plug into everything else we're doing, check out robotsradio.net. Reach out to me on Twitter at robots_radio. Check out the Robots Radio Rocket Club, where you can join me and a bunch of our other creators creating your podcast, starting a new podcast, or helping your current podcast grow. There's more information about that on robotsradio.net as well. And you can always talk with us and the entire community, over 2,000 people on the Robots Radio Discord. Come join us. We'd love to chat with you. See you guys next time.